Your waist didn't expand because your life expanded. It expanded because your body quietly changed the rules. Not loudly, not dramatically. Sometime around your 40s, gradually, without announcement, the body began doing something different with the energy you gave it. Storing fat in a place it hadn't prioritized before, holding it in a way it hadn't before. And the experience of that, for most people, feels less like a consequence and more like a mystery. The scale doesn't move much. The habits haven't changed dramatically. And yet, the shape tells a different story. The waistband communicates something it didn't used to. The mirror raises a question that reasonable explanations don't fully answer. This video is that answer. Most adults in their 40s and 50s describe the same thing, almost word for word. They haven't changed dramatically. They eat roughly the same things. They move roughly the same amount. They are not making obvious, identifiable mistakes. And yet, the middle of the body has started to feel different, thicker, denser, more persistent than it ever was in their 30s. What makes this experience particularly difficult is not the change itself. It is the inability to explain it with the usual framework. The advice that works for weight gain in general, eat less, move more, produces results that are slower, less reliable, and less localized than expected. And the silence around why that is creates its own kind of frustration. What you are experiencing is not a failure. It is a recognized, well-documented biological transition, one that affects the vast majority of adults in midlife, regardless of how carefully they live. And the reason it isn't better understood is that it isn't simply about calories. It is about something happening inside the body's hormonal and metabolic architecture, a shift that began years before most people noticed anything on the outside. By the end of this video, you will understand the specific biology behind midlife abdominal fat, not the general simplified version, the actual mechanism, what hormones are involved, how muscle loss contributes, why the abdomen becomes the destination, what visceral fat specifically does inside the body, and why this matters for your long-term health well beyond appearance. No shortcuts are promised here, just a precise explanation of what is actually happening, and a clear picture of what the science honestly says about it. The story begins not with fat, but with muscle. Starting around age 30 and accelerating through the 40s, the body progressively loses lean muscle mass, roughly 3 to 8% per decade. That pace feels invisible day to day, but its metabolic consequence is significant. Muscle is expensive tissue. It burns energy simply by existing, while you rest, while you sit, while you sleep. As muscle declines, the body's resting metabolic rate declines with it. The Mayo Clinic describes this plainly. Losing muscle mass slows the rate at which the body burns calories. Not overnight, not dramatically, but consistently across years. The arithmetic of your body, the balance between energy consumed and energy used, quietly shifts. Without any change in behavior, the same inputs begin producing different outputs. But muscle loss is only one layer of this story, and the more consequential layer has nothing to do with how many calories the body stores. The critical question in midlife is not how much fat the body accumulates, it is where the body sends it. Research tracking adults across decades documents a consistent, reliable pattern. As people age, fat migrates. It moves away from the limbs, away from the hips and thighs, and toward the abdomen, specifically toward what researchers call visceral fat. Deep fat that surrounds the internal organs rather than sitting beneath the skin. Studies show men in their 80s carry nearly 3 times the visceral fat of men in their 20s. In women, postmenopausal research consistently shows dramatically enlarged abdominal fat depots, even when total body weight remains similar to younger years. This is not random accumulation. It is a directed redistribution, and the force directing it is primarily hormonal. In women, the transition typically begins during perimenopause, often through the mid to late 40s, years before menopause formally arrives. Estrogen, which normally guides fat toward the hips and thighs and supports the body's sensitivity to insulin, begins to fall. As it does, fat loses its primary routing signal. Without estrogen's guidance, it reroutes inward. The data is unambiguous. Postmenopausal women are roughly 5 times more likely to develop central abdominal obesity than premenopausal women of comparable weight. In men, the mechanism operates differently but leads to the same destination. Testosterone declines gradually by approximately 1% per year after 30. Low testosterone correlates reliably with elevated visceral fat. Studies of men with significantly reduced testosterone consistently identify abdominal accumulation as a primary consequence. But this is still not the complete picture. Visceral fat, unlike the fat beneath the skin, behaves as an active biological system. It secretes inflammatory compounds. It releases signals that interfere with insulin function, and in doing so, it establishes a slow, self-reinforcing loop. More visceral fat drives more insulin resistance. More insulin resistance promotes more visceral fat storage. The cycle deepens, often without obvious symptoms, for years before anything registers on a blood panel. 2 further forces compound this, and both are easy to underestimate. The first is cortisol. Chronic stress, the kind accumulated through demanding careers, caregiving, financial pressure, the compound weight of midlife responsibilities, elevates cortisol, a hormone that specifically favors deep abdominal fat storage. The second is sleep. Sleep quality typically deteriorates with age. Lighter, more fragmented, less restorative. Poor sleep raises ghrelin, the hormone signaling hunger, while simultaneously elevating cortisol. The hormonal climate becomes measurably more favorable to visceral accumulation. What emerges is not a single cause, but a convergence. Falling hormones, declining muscle, rising insulin resistance, compounding stress, and sleep disruption arriving together at roughly the same stage of life, all redirecting fat toward the same place. The body didn't malfunction. It followed a new set of instructions it was always going to receive. Now here is the assumption that fails most people, and why. The dominant narrative in fitness culture treats belly fat as a straightforward consequence of excess calories. The prescription follows naturally. Eat less, move more. And while that framework holds a real truth, it misses something fundamental about midlife specifically. Harvard's medical literature is direct. Losing muscle and burning fewer calories produces midsection fat gain, even with unchanged behavior. The redistribution documented in aging populations occurs with stable weight, stable diet, stable activity. The input hasn't changed, the biological operating environment has. Applying the logic of simple calorie restriction to a body whose hormonal architecture has fundamentally shifted produces incomplete results. Not because the person isn't trying, because the diagnosis is incomplete. Body after 40 is not simply a slower version of the body at 30. It is operating under a different hormonal mandate. And a response to that needs to match what is actually happening, not what used to happen in a different biological chapter of your life. So why does this matter beyond how you look or how your waistband fits? Because visceral fat is not metabolically passive. It is independently linked to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. A waist measurement above 40 inches in men or 35 inches in women is recognized by medical guidelines as a meaningful metabolic threshold, not a cosmetic benchmark, but a clinical one. And recent research extends this further. A long-term study published in Nature Communications found that adults who maintained lower visceral fat over a decade had measurably less brain atrophy and better cognitive performance in later life, even after controlling for body weight. The implications are not alarmist, but they are significant. The waistline, it turns out, may be a window into how the brain ages, not only how the heart does. The evidence for meaningful intervention is also real. Consistent aerobic exercise, particularly high-intensity interval training, has been shown in randomized controlled trials to reduce visceral fat significantly over 12 to 16 weeks. Resistance training preserves the muscle that anchors the metabolic rate. Diets built around fiber, whole foods, and lean protein with reduced added sugars and alcohol correlate reliably with lower visceral fat across large population studies. These tools work. They simply need to be understood and applied correctly, calibrated to the biology that actually exists now, not the biology of 20 years ago. After 40, fat does not simply increase. It redistributes inward deep toward the organs, driven by hormonal change, declining muscle, emerging insulin resistance, and the slow compound of stress and fractured sleep. Visceral fat is not ordinary fat. It is metabolically active, hormonally disruptive, and independently linked to outcomes that extend well beyond appearance. And its accumulation in midlife is not primarily a personal failure. It is a biological transition, common, documented, largely predictable, that most people are simply never told is coming. But it is also modifiable, not entirely, not effortlessly, but meaningfully with the right understanding of what is actually driving it. The body at 50 is not broken. It has changed, and that distinction between broken and changed is where a clear, grounded response begins. Your belly fat changed because your biology changed. That is the answer. And knowing that answer is not a small thing. What makes aging difficult is not what changes suddenly, it's what changes quietly. Long before a diagnosis, long before obvious symptoms, and often long before people realize anything is wrong, the body begins leaving clues. Sometimes those clues appear in a routine blood test, not in the numbers that attract the most attention, but in the ones that many people are told are normal and never think about again. And for adults over 40, a few of those numbers can reveal a surprisingly detailed picture of what's happening beneath the surface. That's where we're going next, because understanding those 3 blood test numbers may change the way you look at your health, your future, and even your annual lab results.